Hey y'all, welcome back to Robe Trotting. My name is Derek, this is Mike, and we're Americans living in Denmark since 2017. Today we wanted to talk to you about some of the things that we found crazy or even a little weird and were very surprised to learn when we first moved to Denmark. So one of the first things that surprised us when we moved here was actually something very common. We all have one, but they work a little bit differently in Denmark, and that is a name.
Yeah, that's right. It seems like when we first moved here, everyone had more or less the same name. You're a Casper, a Jesper. It's not that many different first names. But then we learned that maybe part of the reason why is there's literally a navneloven, a name law that dictates how names can be given in Denmark.
Yeah, and we come from a country where like celebrities will name their kid Apple and stuff. So it was a bit of a surprise for us to learn about all of these complicated naming laws, especially because we also found out that a lot of Danes don't even name their kid right away when they leave the hospital. A lot of them want to kind of get to know the personality of the baby before they give it a name. And we learned that you can actually only have 6 months to do this. So if you don't name your kid within 6 months, you're actually going to get a fine from Denmark. And if you don't name your kid in 6 months, it automatically gets the surname or the last name of the mother. When it comes to first names, there's some other very interesting rules. Like there's an actual registry of first names that you are allowed to pick from. Now, don't worry, it's got something like 21,000 boy names and 25,000 girl names, more than that. And I think there's another like 1,500 or so neutral names that you can pick from. And you can also have as many names as you want. So if you're very indecisive and you still get to that 6 month point and you want to give your kid like 2 or 3 names, that's 100% okay with Denmark. You can have as many first names as you want, as long as you don't make it too complicated for the child.
Yeah, and if 21,000 boys' names and 25,000 girl names aren't enough what you want to name your child, there actually is a way that you can be able to appeal and register a different name. It has to go through a review to make sure it's not going to be detrimental to the child. But in 2021, there were 90 names that were added to the register. And let's look at this because I think they're quite good to go through. You can have new names, so novel names like Africa, Berlin, all want to be named after places maybe you had a wonderful vacation on.
Aren't they 80s band names too?
Also could be that.
Maybe that's where it came from.
That generational switch. There's Blue. I guess somebody wants to be a big Beyonce fan.
Yeah. Same name for her baby.
Yeah.
There's like 8 now. So
yeah, so it's not even that new anymore. Yeah. I guess maybe you don't want to name your kid Apple, but there are some Danish words that came through, like circle, soya, and sne, just in case you don't want to name your kid Elsa like everybody else, but still love Frozen, and so name your girl Sne, or boy.
Snow.
Yeah.
My personal favorite is Awesome. So you can name your kid Awesome because now that's on the registry. Also the name Human, just keep it really simple. Human, name your dog, and name your baby Human. Also Camel, which could be confusing.
Could be.
Also a name. And Viking, which was the one that surprised me that it took until 2021 for that to be registered as
the Viking Age was 1,000 years ago. How has nobody had the name Viking yet?
Just getting around to it.
Yeah. Viking Jensen. I like that one.
Yeah. Well, speaking of last names, we'll get to that. Middle names are a bit more complicated, where you can have as many middle names as you want to. However, these are often surnames. So usually people will, if they're going to have, say, 2 names, like maybe Anameta, that would be the 2 first names. And then the surname would be, the middle name would often be a surname of maybe the mother or a grandparent, something like that. For last names, it gets a little bit more complicated because you can only have one. What you'll see sometimes is people hyphenating maybe the mother and the father's surname, but you do have to have only one surname. You can also pick from another list of free surnames that are available. These are surnames or last names that you can have if less than 2,000 people in Denmark, more than 2,000 people in Denmark also have that surname. So if you want to be Viking Jensen and neither of your parents have the last name Jensen, then they can make your last name Jensen if they want to. However, if less than 2,000 people in Denmark have that surname, it's a protected surname. So you can't have it unless you inherit it.
And if you're ever wondering how many people have the same name as you, you can actually go onto a website of the Danish government where you can type in your first name, your last name, both, and you can see literally how many of you are in Denmark. I found out there's 4 of me.
We only need 1.
All right, names are a lot of fun, but one of the other things that was crazy that we didn't know about, especially when you look at modern Denmark and modern Sweden, such peaceful, Nordic, kind of idyllic little countries. They're also the most bloodthirsty two countries on the face of the earth. No countries have gone to war more often than Denmark and Sweden. They seem so innocent these days.
Yeah, I actually remember early on, I think it was our first weekend that I was living here too. We walked down around Copenhagen. We went to Newhound. I'm like, oh, this is cute. I wanted to learn more information about it. I pulled up my phone, looked on Wikipedia, and I learned the fact that it was actually a canal that was dug out by Swedish prisoners of war. And I like, my mind exploded. I was like, what? Prisoners of war from Sweden? When would that have happened? And then I started looking into this history that we missed in studying European history in the US. We didn't get that far.
No, we basically go from Vikings to World War II, and in between, basically every time a new king of Denmark or Sweden came to power, the first thing they did was get the crown. The second thing they did was attack the other country. So countries weren't really big things back then, but then we can say in the more modern periods, from say the 16th century on, Denmark and Sweden have gone to war officially 11 times. Unfortunately, Sweden's won 7 of them. Fortunately, handball is something that Denmark is much better at, so we have that these days.
Yeah, and speaking of these days, another thing that really shocked me about moving to Denmark, and one thing that was just really weird at first, is week numbers. I know we talked about this in at least one other video, but it bears repeating. Week numbers were just something that I was not used to, and most of the rest of the world isn't either. What I mean by that is I know that there's 52 weeks of the year, but often, whether it's in a work setting or even in a personal setting, people will just say to you, you know, I'm kind of busy, let's push this off and meet up again in week 12. And in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, well, so that's got to be like March? Like, when is week 12? I'm just used to a date. Like, give me a date. How about Wednesday, the week after next? Or very specifically, March 15th. Whatever the date is, just give it to me straight, but not necessarily here.
Well, I'll say this. I've kind of enjoyed the work number, or the week numbers. Like, it works well at work in particular. I mean, I know that if I schedule a meeting in week 7 or 42, anyone who has kids will probably be on vacation because those are the school holiday weeks. Also, bad weekends to go try and fly out of the cities here in Denmark because everybody's getting out of Denmark those weeks. So it's actually something I've kind of adopted. And if you don't know what week it is, there's a website for that too.
Yeah, I think it's actually Ugnia, which translates to week number, and I probably didn't pronounce super well. But that will be it's literally just a website dedicated to being able to pull up quickly and see what week number it is. Now, all jokes aside, I think you're right with the part with kids, because most often I'll hear this from friends or colleagues that have children because they have to be, you know, sort of hyper aware of what the school calendar is, and there's different things, like even just those school holidays that revolve around a week number. Or we have some friends who are no longer together with the parent of the child that they have, and they maybe have custody of that child on the odd weeks, and then the even weeks they are free to spend more time together. So that's usually when I hear it more with people that have kids.
Yeah. So I guess week numbers may be something that you find personally hard, but something that is scientifically hard is our next fact, which is Danish is a hard language scientifically. In fact, there's been research done, this recent one done from Aarhus University, that proved that Danish is actually difficult to learn. And they proved that by looking at how children learn languages. In fact,
they could have just looked how I learned.
That's true. That would have been more than enough research right there. But rather than that, they put kids in front of a screen to see how it was for them to be able to adapt to Danish versus other languages. Because it's been shown that Danish children have a vocabulary that's, say, 30% smaller than Norwegian children of the same age. And on top of that, Danish children tend to be almost 2 years behind their peers in Norwegian when it comes to understanding the past tense. It doesn't make me feel so bad that I can't understand the past tense either. And I've had 6 years. Yeah,
it took me about 3 years to learn English, so I figured by my 6th year living in Denmark, I'd have it down. But no, it didn't work out that way.
No, not at all. But part of the reason why that Danish is so difficult is just all of the damn vowel sounds. I mean, for one, the alphabet adds 3 more on top of the 5 that all of us know and love. I mean, you have your A, and you say them kind of that way.
But it's more the sounds, right?
It's all about the sounds. And in fact, Danish has more than 40 sounds. To compare that, you have English, which has, say, between 13 and 15, depending on your dialect. Norwegian and Swedish, which should be kind of the same, they run at more like 17 to 19. So Danish literally has twice as many different sounds that you have to not only understand, but also say to be able to actually speak in Danish.
Now, one Danish that's a little bit easier to swallow, is the actual Danish pastry. And what I was really surprised to learn about is that what I thought was a Danish pastry growing up in the United States and seeing on the shelf in my grocery store or at a local bakery in the US is very different than what Danes would call a Danish. In fact, they may not even call it a Danish. Usually they'll call it wienerbrød or Vienna bread. And that all goes back to a baker strike that happened in the mid 1800s.
Yeah, so basically the bakers went on strike here in Denmark, and so the bakeries still had to be able to bake bread, so they imported labor from elsewhere. In this case, they came from Austria. So the Austrian bakers came in and they brought their own delicacies, pastries, and ideas from their home country. One of them being this delicious, buttery, flaky treat that now we all know and love and have breakfast with their colleagues and have it, and they called it the wienerbrød because obviously the bakers were from Vienna.
Yeah, and I guess when it comes down to it, it's basically the same. A lot of these recipes are just adapted or things that existed in Denmark before. It's a bit of just having an exotic name that really makes something a little bit special and stands out.
So we all know and love the delicious Danish pastry, but speaking of agriculture, did you know that there are more than twice as many pigs as people in Denmark? I don't know what you think about Denmark, but usually it's probably thinking about the cities like Copenhagen, the amusement parks like Tivoli, maybe Legoland as well, but it's actually an agricultural powerhouse for a country of its size. I mean, more than 2/3 of the land is actually under agricultural cultivation. That's by far the highest inside the EU. And it's also a country that's been renowned for its advances, especially in things like dairy industry and the pork industry, to the point where it's an agricultural leader globally.
Yeah, I had kind of heard that I should be expecting to eat a lot of pork when I moved here, and I was not disappointed. There is a lot of pork. Luckily, it's a food that I enjoy, and I think that the Danes have some really nice traditional dishes that are made with pork products. But I did not realize the scale of which there were 3 times as many pigs, 13 million pigs compared to 5.8 million people living in Denmark.
Yeah, and that kind of, as I mentioned before about how it's been at the vanguard of the agricultural industry, Denmark is also renowned for having, small farms, having them operate in collectives or cooperatives that have come together, which helped, especially during the 19th century, lead to a lot of mechanization of things like dairies to be able to be a key exporter of dairy products like butter, which is renowned all around Europe as well. So it's always been at the vanguard there. Also, you may not know this, but Denmark used to be the world's largest producer of furs, making more than a quarter of the world's supply. Though that stopped in the last couple of years, and the reason why is another matter.
Funny. So, not a high point in humor, but the highest point in Denmark is also something that we found a bit crazy and some very interesting stories that we learned about it. So when you think of Scandinavia, you probably think of mountains and fjords, Norway, Sweden, but Denmark is kind of the outlier and very different. In fact, the highest point is only 170 meters in elevation.
Yeah, and beyond 170 meters not being all that high, there's also been a lot of confusion over the years on what the actual highest point in Denmark is. For ages, it was thought to be a place known as
Christiania?
No, the highest point.
Oh, okay.
The highest point is Himmelberg, which is also known as Heaven Mountain in English. And it's over in Jutland, and for centuries it was believed to be the highest point in all of Denmark.
Yeah, but an ironic name because Himmel Mountain or Heaven Mountain would signify to geologists that it's at least 300 meters in elevation, and at only 170 meters, it's certainly not qualified to be a mountain at all.
Even though the flag comes down from the heavens, it seems like the mountain doesn't quite reach that high in Denmark. But that was only until 1847 when they discovered that's not actually the highest point in Denmark. Instead, it was a burial mound from the Bronze Age in Jutland as well that was slightly higher than Himmelberg. The first one they believe that was the highest point is called, let me look this up, it's Ejerbaunhøj. And that only lasted 100 years as the highest point in Denmark until a neighboring burial ground known as Yndlingskehøj was discovered to be slightly higher by about 25 centimeters. But all this controversy on the highest point in Denmark ended in 2005. It's my favorite controversy in all of Denmark. In 2005, researchers discovered that actually the highest point in Denmark is a place called Møllehøj, or Mill Hill, I guess. It's slightly higher than either of those burial grounds, and so therefore it is the highest point in all of Denmark.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's just like on some dude's farm, which is the most hilarious part because all they did was put kind of like a concrete marker there. But the other places that they thought were the previous highest points, they actually built some like very nice monuments and then kind of had like some egg on their face, so to speak, when they realized that it wasn't actually the highest point and something else was. But they have some nice monuments there to commemorate being the second, third, fourth highest. And at this point, they're like, fuck it. Which is also something that may surprise you about Denmark, and certainly surprised us, is just how much Danes say the F word or use colorful cursing language compared to us in America. But if you want to know why they do this, and there's a very good reason and several very good reasons, you'll have to watch this video right here to find out why Danes say the F word so much. Thanks for watching, everybody. Hi.